All and welcome to CHD 201. This is the lecture video for chapter 1, Understanding Child Development. So you can follow along with me on page 4 of your textbook. If you want to, you might want to stop the video, go to the quiz, possibly print the quiz or write the questions down and then come back and join me because you might find this helpful and answering some questions on your quiz. So chapter 1 is learning about children and understanding child development. So what is it? Child development is one of the most fascinating subjects you can study. Children are constantly changing and discovering. So as you learn about children, you will see that they go through many stages of growth and development. We're going to talk about the early years, which is before birth through elementary school or 9 years of age, because we know that those are the most important years in shaping children's lives. So what is child development? Well, development is the gradual process through which babies become adults. Development begins at conception and continues until we die. Child development, however, is the scientific study of children. And it's the scientific study of children from conception to adolescence. Okay? Child development is concerned with the whole child and the process or changes that occur in both growth and behavior. So when we talk about growth, we're talking about changes in their size, okay, their height, their weight, their vocabulary even, okay? But changes in behavior include any change in motor, like their physical changes, okay? Thinking and social skills. Now, child development can be divided into 3 or 4 domains. It just depends on which book or which class you're looking at, okay? So we're talking about physical domain. We're talking about cognitive or the intellectual piece domain. Sometimes you see people say social emotional and talk about them as one, or sometimes they divide them into 2, social domain and then emotional domain, okay? So physical development involves growth of the body and the development of large and small motor skills, you know that. Intellectual development or cognitive development includes how people learn, what people learn, and how people express what they know through language. And social emotional development concerns interactions with people and social groups, okay? So the domains of child development constantly interact. So your book gives a great example, which I think this is wonderful. So an example would be learning to walk, which is physical development, leads to a more mobile child to explore and learn about objects, which influences their intellectual or cognitive development. And by showing caregivers what can be done with an object aids interactions with others, like social development. So they may show you what they can do. That's their social development. And brings pleasure when you praise the child for what they have shown you that they can do. It brings pleasure to the child through emotional development. So these behaviors lead to changes in the brain, which then goes back all the way back to physical development. Okay. So what are some factors that influence growth and development? Well, why is each child different? There's 2 main factors that make children different, and they are called heredity, and one is called environment, okay? Heredity is going to be all the traits that are passed down to a child from blood relatives. Sometimes we call that nature, okay? Environment includes all the conditions and situations that surround a child and affect them as well. And sometimes we call that nurture. So you may hear the argument about nature versus nurture. It's really heredity versus environment, okay? The way these 2 factors combine also makes children different from one another, okay? So let's talk a second about heredity. Lots of times people have many traits in common with their parents or siblings or whatever, and that's because they are passed down through genes, okay? Now, almost every physical, intellectual, and social emotional trait is affected by the genes, okay, affected by heredity. Genes influence your growth and development as well in many ways. Um, Genes will help determine your body features, such as your blood type, facial structure, color of your hair, color of your eyes, the color of your skin. Sometimes, and other times, other traits like your intellectual ability and social emotional traits are also affected by genes, but they're also affected by your environment. Okay. So all people live in a physical or a social environment. Okay, unborn babies live in a physical environment that is totally dependent upon the mother's physical condition, right? But also there's a social environment that people can that when once you're born, you're in a more social environment that affects the way a child grows and develops in their physical, intellectual, cognitive, and social emotional domains. Okay, so heredity, environment, both are very influential. So for lots of years, people argued which one was had more influence on development. Was it the heredity or was it the environment? Which one affected growth and development more? So often, like I said earlier, it was called nature versus nurture. And so there's really no way to study environment separate from heredity because the environment has to act upon your genes. Okay, so now experts are agreeing that these two things work together, that heredity and environment work together to affect growth and development. Your heredity, how heredity affected by environment is geneticists have discovered genes are not fixed as once they thought they were, if that makes any sense. The environment that a person lives in both before and after birth can alter your genes, okay? Because you can be in a positive, you can have positive influences in your environment, like health, quality learning experiences, supportive and loving, nurturing relationships. But you can also have negative factors that can include toxic substances, poor health practices, lack of quality experiences with objects and people that provide stressors. And then these stressors can cause you to worry and have anxiety, which also would negatively impact your growth and development. So you can see how environment plays a tremendous role, even altering sometimes the genes and how that works with the heredity. Okay. So there's just a little tidbit about nature versus nurture or heredity versus environment. Now, we have principles and theories of growth and development. Basic patterns of growth and development are called principles. Basic patterns, okay? These principles are universal, meaning they apply to all children at all times. They're typically predictable, which means that they will occur in future observations, like you can see the sequence, okay? And they're orderly, they're in a pattern, a sequenced way of doing, okay? So why are principles of development important? Well, when you make any decision about a child, taking into account these principles is kind of will aid development, but ignoring the principles will likely hinder their development. Okay. Each person is unique, and however, yet people are more alike than they are different. Okay, when it comes to these principles, because these patterns are the principles of growth and development do not fit every person exactly. They are true enough to be used as a guide. However, when learning about children, we want to use these principles of growth and development as our guide. Okay. Because growth and development, for the most part, it's gradual and it's continuous. Okay. So for growth and development to be continuous, change must build on what children have already learned. So an example of that would be writing comes from making random marks. The steps in growth and development follow one another in an orderly set called sequence steps. Okay, or sometimes we call these milestones. You may have been in some classes where we've talked about developmental milestones. So why are milestones important? Because not everybody's going to reach the milestone at the exact same time and do it the exact same way. We know that. But remember, we said these are just a guide. These are just there to help us guide our instruction or to know what to look for. Okay. So milestones aid you in working with children because they give us an idea about teachable moments. Okay. And a teachable moment is an optimal time when a person can learn a new skill or a new task. And teachable moments occur when the body and the mind are physically ready to do those things. Okay. And when the caregiver supports the child in learning these new tasks, then that's that teachable moment. Okay. But we know that growth and development happen at different rates for different people. Not everybody, not even siblings, are going to do things exactly the same at the exact same time, right? Um, but there usually is a range that these things happen. Okay, so when my child turned 1 year and 3 days and 2 hours, they walked. Well, that doesn't mean that the sibling, when they turn 1 year, 2 days, and 3 minutes, or whatever I just said, is going to walk again at the same time. Okay, that's not how it works. But usually there's a norm. Okay, there's a range that tells us when children will be able to do things. And it's one of those things where we talk about when children may have a developmental delay, like they do things long after the range. Okay, so they're performing it like a younger child. So they may be 3, but they're doing the task of like a 1-year-old, or they're hitting the milestones of a 1-year-old. However, they're 3. Okay, so that's how we know when they may be developmentally delayed. One thing to remember, one main thing to take away is that physical, intellectual, and social aspects of growth and development, or those domains, are all interrelated. Okay, because we know that each one of those affects the other. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you is about studying and observing children and a person called Maslow. Well, Maslow was Abraham Maslow, and he was a theorist. And what he did was he was one of the first researchers to study basic human needs, okay, and how they impact growth and development, okay? So he created something called a hierarchy, and it was basically, hierarchy means to rank things from the greatest need down, or what's the most important as we go down. So he made a hierarchy of human needs, and what he told us is that the first 4 levels in his hierarchy include basic needs, like physical needs and psychological needs. Okay, if you are looking on page 22 of your book, it's a pyramid. I don't know if y'all can see that. I'm trying to show it to you, but I don't know. I'm learning new about this. That's how you barely see it, but there it is. Okay, so page 22. He works from the bottom up. Okay, so you see the basic needs are physical needs: need for air, water, food, clothing, shelter, medical care. Then you need to go up and you need to feel security, love and acceptance, have self-esteem. Okay, so read all of that about Maslow, because it makes such perfect good sense when you're talking about heredity environment too. Okay, so that hierarchy of needs, what we're saying is the basic needs are those water, food, shelter, love and support, those kinds of things. Okay, so as you think about yourself as it relates to understanding child development, remember that people live in a child-centered society, which a child-centered society is one that sees children as important, cares about their well-being, and works to meet their needs. Some children also experience, however, a great deal of harm through abuse and neglect. Children need safe environments, hence going back to Maslow. They need homes, schools, and other places where they can develop to their full potential, which goes back to understanding child growth and development so that you will know when they aren't hitting those developmental milestones. So that covers basically what we needed to talk about with chapter 1. Make sure that you go through the PowerPoint, you look at all the supplemental resources, and then take your quiz. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next week.